So, ein letztes Mal für heute.
So, final session, and welcome to all of you. I now say we are on the final stretch, and I hope you have enough capacity and enough concentration for a very interesting 1.5-hour discussion. Evolution instead of revolution. That was one of the conclusions from the white paper on Labor 4.0 presented by Andrea Nahles some years ago when she was still Minister of Labor in Germany. I think she's just entering the room. No, she's not, but anyway. And evolution in this context is not necessarily a contradiction in terms with the experienced revolution we can all talk about. A lot of us go to bed with their smartphones and greet their smartphones before they greet their family members in the morning. And I read that the girlfriend of the president of Italy terminated their relationship by Instagram, and asking people for instructions in a city you don't know will probably be a thing of the past very soon. These are not urgent issues, but they are close to that, because as we are networking through Facebook globally, that we order goods from Amazon and communicate through all these channels, is the reason why these companies make so much money. And at the end of these interesting 1.5 days of our conference, we want to ask again whether digital capitalism can be tamed for the benefit of all of us. Now, I really look forward to the keynote of Susan Crawford. She comes from the renowned Harvard Law School in Boston. She worked for ICANN, that is the organization that administers IT addresses. And Ms. Crawford, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you particularly to Sandra Schulz for that kind introduction. Thank you to the FES for inviting me. This is a great honor for me, and I'm delighted to be here with you. I hope you will be patient with me. I am American. I'm so American. There's nothing I can do about it, and I'm sure that I am blinded by that in ways I cannot even perceive. So forgive me. You asked me to talk about digital capitalism. I hope I can share with you insights from my last 20 years of life dealing with those issues in the United States and the tragic path, in many ways, that the country has been following. I plan to offer you some lessons from the US experience about how to deal with the status quo of digital capitalism, in hopes your story will be entirely different. To do this, I want to be provocative and challenging and colorful and cheerful, and yet all of you are thinking about cocktails. So again, stick with us. This will be interesting. In order to do this, I'm going to talk about 3 things. First, the changing role over the last 30 years of the public sector in America. Second, I'll talk about how those developments have affected the digital world in my country. And then I'll give you some very concrete recommendations for the forms of government intervention that are necessary to forward public values, all while being cheerful and resilient. So let's start. The public sector in America. You may have heard something is very wrong with the way we live in America right now, and it's profoundly wrong in a host of interrelated ways. After 30 years of steady attacks on the role of the public sector in life in America, on the idea of the public sector having anything to do with private markets, including any role in economic regulation, particularly in these critical digital information markets, we're in a terrible situation. It seems amazing, but the idea that liberal democracy includes individual rights that are cabined by norms and institutions that constrain money-making in the service of public values, that's a difficult to convey idea in America right now. This lack of understanding is leading to a genuine trail of tears in my beloved country because of our unquestioning belief in the magic of the marketplace and the primacy of individual money-making as the only value that matters. We in America are living through a period of grotesque inequality. That inequality has truly vicious outgrowths for those who weren't born with the means to purchase a thriving life. Bad health, terrible education, fear, lack of trust, and a corrosive sense of unfairness afflict many people in America, my deeply polarized country. It's a kind of barbaric circle. Everyone, rich and poor, in this unequal, value-free context, feels extreme uncertainty. Something like what I read the Eastern man is feeling these days in Germany. Fear of the other. That fear of the other also translates into fear and lack of trust in civic institutions, in the entire role of government, at the same time that those civic institutions have been systematically undermined, underfunded, under-resourced for the last 30 years by people who had economic incentives to do so. It is pretty clear that democracy and capitalism cannot survive in America if their only purpose is to help the rich get richer. I keep hoping we'll wake up. Surely Americans should understand how important it is for governments to moderate the misery and chaos and despair that result from unrestrained money-making. After the two world wars and the Great Depression that followed after the 1914, even Americans absolutely understood that it simply is not true that unrestrained private gain leads to public good. You would have been laughed off the stage in the 1950s in America under a Republican president, by the way. You would have been laughed at if you had even suggested such a thing. Today, even mentioning economic policy, oversight, or regulation in America triggers the word socialist. I can't tell you how ridiculous that is. Here's a quote from some campaign materials that were circulating in South Carolina. I was following an election closely yesterday there. Listen to this closely. This election is no longer about Republicans versus Democrats, but in reality, all capital letters, is Americans versus socialists. That is an imprecation. That's a swear word in America. There was a full-page ad in the New York Times on Sunday reading, "Will the US become a socialist nation on November 6th? Will the US cease to become that independent bastion of freedom, free enterprise, and capitalism?" Full-page ad, and it goes on. The false narrative of the left-leaning politicians attempting to achieve power is to promise free benefits to the electorate. That's exactly how Chavez got elected. That's where we got Cuba. It's stunning, it's shocking. Of course, everyone knows that these benefits are not free. Someone has to pay for them, the American taxpayer. And here are the buzzwords. We then move from an economy based on individual responsibility and personal choice to one where a government now makes all our decisions, often in the most inefficient way. Note the use of that word, inefficient. I'll return to this concept. It's central to the fight against the role of government in America. Liberal democracy does not equate to a government telling us what is good for us. Rather, it means that the public sector, through a combination of oversight over private companies and industrial policy, requires functioning, competitive markets, including in the digital sphere, and the possibility of a thriving life for everyone with a belly button. That's what liberal democracy is. In America, though, at the federal level, this hollowing out of government, of the capacity of government in numbers and funding and expertise, searing inequality, and a bizarre lack of understanding of the importance of government is leading to very strange language. Large companies in America are, particularly in the communications and data-driven realm, seizing the language of individual rights and freedom and demanding that they be protected against government, against the operation of the rule of law by government, and saying that individual freedom will be hopelessly compromised if government has anything to say about their activities. They also claim, digital conglomerates and oligopolists, they also claim that their size and smoothness as conglomerates will provide efficiency and potentially low prices to consumers, as if that were the only value that mattered. It's not actually clear those efficiencies do get passed on to consumers, by the way, especially in market-powerful companies. So that's what's happened to the public sector in America. Except for local government, people really don't trust it, and it has very little capacity, and it needs to be rebuilt. My second thing I want to talk to you is about the effect on digital capitalism of this state of affairs. Because our public institutions have been hollowed out and are not trusted, digital oligopolies and conglomerates can get away with all this. They end up being subject to neither oversight by government nor competition that would temper their animal spirits. So, in New York City, 85% of Uber drivers receive less than minimum pay per hour for their work, and almost all of them are working full-time, and they cannot support their families. They are free to do so, says Uber. Uber is really a data company getting ready for the advent of driverless cars. They don't care about the drivers. That's not the point. The point is the data, to know exactly what places are popular and where rides are needed. Meanwhile, the company is systematically undermining support for public transit by deeply subsidizing rides in the New York City area, so that riders are actually paying half or less than half of the actual cost of the ride. Why? So that they can grow, gain market share, gain increased investment. They are after growth, not profit at the moment, so that eventually, their investors hope, they can drive out all competition. I've spent a lot of time studying Comcast, which is a giant local monopoly cable provider in the United States. It controls access to the internet in several metro areas of my country. Comcast calls itself a speaker, like the press, and so avoids all economic regulation. It is vertically integrated into content without limitation. So it may have started as a transport company, but now owns many, many different forms of content, including, as you know, most recently Sky. It's a conglomerate now, as well as a private, unregulated utility, in effect. It can charge whatever it wants for anything. It has 1,000 dials to spin to squeeze producers of content, consumers, media markets, metro areas, whatever it wants to do. It is a gatekeeper also that sits on huge piles of data that it can use as leverage in any given market. Meanwhile, millions of Americans can't afford the internet access of which Comcast is the monopoly provider in their city. Okay, so back to the rule of law in a functioning democracy. People who study history understand that you actually need institutions using the rule of law to govern individual behavior in the service of greater values. These institutions provide a check on the public mob yearning for blood or money. Groups of people simply want their way, and when they don't get their way, it's hard for them to understand that their leaders are defying their wishes merely because that's the way democracy works, because we need a check on mob rule. But now, especially as government is weakening and its institutions aren't trusted, and it's not providing enough that is good for people in people's eyes, people are turning to conspiracy theories about what is actually influencing their public leaders. The unseen hand must be directing people in public office. Those unseen hands might be, should be Jewish, or an immigrant, someone who doesn't look like us. They will look for that. They are finding that. And then they ask for direct rule so as to get around these conspiracies that they worry about, which is a disaster. People will push for strong men who may protect their racial team, their group, but no one else. And those strong men will forever favor the sources of money that got them there in the first place. So, Donald Trump. In my country, it's been a difficult time. You will have heard about pipe bombs sent to his critics, the promise of violence following these midterm elections, the massacre of Jews, the claim that a horde of criminal alien immigrants is about to sweep over the border unless attacked. There's also a rich corporate angle to this. A big headline in the New York Times recently, corporate wrongdoers get break under Trump. And it's true, much less enforcement of the rule of law. This took its worst form in March when Mohammed bin Salman was, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, was marched around Washington. Why? Money, access to deals for the United States. Money above all other values. Mr. Trump says that he is free because he's rich. He says he is independent, but actually, he has empowered the large corporations that are doing so well. It is our fault for not making the case for government, a strong case for the role of government in people's lives. As a good thing, it is our fault that in the US, you have to tell me what's happened in Germany, but in my country, government institutions have become too distant, too non-responsive, too elite, the place of elites serving other elites. At the same time, simultaneously being underfunded, undercapitalized, and under-resourced. A graduate student at Harvard said to me recently, why do we need government at all? Couldn't the private sector do everything that government does, except better? He was serious. So that's my second point. That's what's happened to the digital status quo in America because of the hollowed out status of the public sector. So part 3. So you don't follow us down this absurd path, I have a few concrete suggestions. Once we can shore up a basic public belief in the role of government at all, and here in America, I think it's going to take global warming, climate change, rising sea levels for anybody to believe the government has a role to play, because only government can do the long-term planning needed to address rising water. So once we have that belief that government is important and can be trusted, it's clear that stronger institutions with greater capacity are needed to take on the Deutsche Telekoms and the Comcasts of this world. I am being deliberate in my choice of companies. It is clearly in the interest of the telecom companies, in my country, cable is very powerful, to get everybody focused on Facebook and Google and Amazon and Netflix. It's like telling a bunch of kids running after a football, go over there, look at them, don't look at us. And the messaging on that point in Washington is very clear. The Comcast's trade group will say, who you really should be worried about is Google and Amazon and Netflix. And I want to at least suggest that that is not a great direction as a matter of priority for any liberal democracy to take. It is my strong belief that 2 steps are key for changing the status quo of digital capitalism. First, unlimited, cheap, ubiquitous, symmetric, open connectivity made possible by widespread availability of passive wholesale infrastructure. Those of you who follow telecom will understand this. Let me spell it out. Just the glass in the ground, fiber optic, doesn't have to be lit, but it should be there and it should be publicly controlled. It should not be, oh, thank you. I have a book coming out about this called Fiber. I have a book coming. So that's the first thing. You really need that, and the government should not necessarily be involved in providing services, but should make sure that street cred is available. And I've traveled the world to discover that story, and I just want to repeat it. Second, structural, not behavioral remedies or interventions by government are essential and need to be imposed on digital companies with market power that have vertically integrated into additional supply chain areas. In short, only forcing competition into every area of the market will change the status quo. So first, on this fiber point, Deutsche Telekom has no particular incentive to upgrade everybody to unlimited cheap connectivity in Germany. It is making a host of claims about its plans for advanced 5G wireless right now, and I'm seeing the same thing in the US from Verizon. Don't follow us. Don't listen to this. As I've understood from my visits to Korea and other places, the whole point of 5G is to make everything perfectly chargeable for, perfectly monetizable, and perfectly controllable by a single actor in any urban area. Whatever you can do to make sure there's industrial policy allowing for that street grid is essential. With lots of interconnects to allow for stationary Wi-Fi everywhere, complemented by mobile carrier service when you're in a car or a bus. It should be unlimited and cheap, and the government should not itself be selling the service. That high-capacity connectivity will make human presence possible at a distance, something we have not experienced yet in America and not in Germany. This will allow for new forms of online interaction, new forms of businesses, new ways of making a living, new ways of visiting a doctor, getting an education. New things can emerge online that are not dependent on Facebook or Google. So Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, we call them the FANGs. They all come from an era of scarce connectivity, of early experimentation in an atmosphere of scarcity. With this phase change towards fiber, new businesses can arise. Government should also be supporting basic research in those new businesses so that in Germany, new things can be born that don't come from America. So both of these things, passive infrastructure and a truly competitive research foundation, are fundamental to the emergence of digital markets, new digital markets, and government should be playing a central role in laying that foundation. The second crucial step is heading towards structural remedies for companies with market power at one layer or another of digital supply chains. Companies should be forced to choose a hat. Your hat should be either transport or content, but not both. Because, and watch Deutsche Telekom on this one, they say will be transport and Internet of Things. There are tremendous pernicious risks with that. Either provide search functions or sell products and services yourself, not both. Facebook is harder. It's a media company with big network effects, hard to see how you would slice it up. But its role as a gatekeeper in increasing numbers of media markets should be sharply examined, as should its use of data as a structural barrier to competition. Although it's ignored in America, often the built-in conflicts of interest that digital conglomerates have when they vertically integrate up the supply chain. So for example, when Comcast owns content or when Amazon not only runs the marketplace, but also owns the things that are sold through that marketplace. It's insidious, and it's a secret source of strength for companies with significant market power. Vertical integration in digital markets characterized by a few oligopolistic players is not good for democracy or for society. Our Department of Justice, for this very reason, fiercely challenged the merger of AT&T with Time Warner Content and is continuing that fight. So something good has come out of the Trump administration. I also know from long experience, take it from me, that behavioral limitations, trying to say with words, don't discriminate, don't work when they fly in the face of economic incentives to do exactly the opposite. They're really ineffective. Data portability mandates, interconnection mandates are behavioral, not structural, and they're easy to game, unbelievably difficult to enforce. No one should be commissioner of algorithms. It's just too hard. So those are my two enormous recommendations here. Businesses with market power at one level of a digital supply chain that seek to move into another layer need to choose a hat. Just choose the hat, stay on that level. And if you've got too much power on that level, you should be smaller. Pretty simple. Oh, thank you. Thank you, friends. The major point here, and the one that I think is important for the SPD as it looks forward, is that the focus of government intervention in the digital realm must be on fostering competition, not lowering prices. Oligopolies in the digital realm get to scale because they deliberately underprice their services. Remember what Uber is doing in New York City. And they're backed by investors who are happy to lose billions for years through that practice, because their hope is someday, through vertical integration and scale, they will dominate fistfuls of what might otherwise be competitive markets. These oligopolies can so easily cross-subsidize using that capital and charge predatory prices. Uber wants growth, so does Amazon, not profits. Listen to this, Google has spent $10 billion developing an autonomous car. It has no profits yet. But it's willing to spend all that money because the plan is that it will achieve such scale in metro areas that allow driverless cars in that it will be able to avoid any competition. Scale is everything in digital markets, characterized by very few actors. This is an enormous barrier to entry. You can lead a quiet life, untroubled by competition or oversight, if you're one of these actors. I've learned over the years that tacit market division is easy. You take Minneapolis, I'll take Sacramento. You don't need a contract, you just figure it out through signaling to each other. And workers and suppliers don't stand a chance when they try to negotiate against these enormous companies. If efficiency and low prices are the only things of value, you'll be missing lots of other things that are important to a functioning society. Innovation, quality, variety. In the US, we've allowed a few companies to have enormous power and squeeze producers, workers, suppliers with ease. They are conglomerates with many pockets, so they can price however they like anything they do. And here is the really hard part. Politically, in this realm, nothing in the digital or physical world of capitalism can be harnessed in the service of public values without visible, visceral, cared-for civic institutions in place that reflect those values and are genuinely responsive to public, common human needs. Government needs to make people's lives better before they will support moving away from the profit, above all else, religion. So, widely available symmetric connectivity, for which the basic infrastructure is public rather than private. Great taxis, great trains mean that Uber can't get a foothold. Great public education, great respect given to every member of society will mean misinformation campaigns on Facebook can't gain hold. Government-funded basic research, another basic area. And investment in government capacity has to come first before you take on the smooth, colorful brands of these giant oligopolies. Left to its own devices, the private market will never provide these common public needs. A banking system, an inexpensive form of public transit, ubiquitous digital connectivity, adaptation to climate change, decent jobs accompanied by a safety net of benefits, or competitive digital markets. All of these things are infrastructural in nature. All of them require brave public leadership and a simple recognition that the role of government is important. My midterm elections are over. We remain a deeply polarized country, and I have hope for America, but it will take tremendous leadership, and I look forward to our conversation here.
Thank you very much. Take a seat here. Und haben wir noch eine Übersetzung für Frau Crawford? Ja, auch ich freue mich jetzt sehr auf unsere Diskussion.
I'm too looking forward to our fruitful discussion. Andrea Nahles is here, the party chairman of the SPD and the parliamentary group. Welcome.
Ja. Gucken Sie mal, genau hier. Und Christiane Benner.
And Christiane Benner is with us as well, the second chairman of the Confederation of the Metalworkers Trade Union. Please join me up here on the stage. Right, let's now try to get rid of the first slightly depressive mood that we get into after listening to your presentation in this group up here. It was really a doomy picture that you painted, but this is where it belongs. Thank you very much for being so honest. Now we try to address the very big questions which are very important to us and zoom in on the digital corporates, Facebook, Google. Andrea Nahles, chairman of the SPD. What do you think of when you think of these big players making lots of money with the data of the European consumers? Well, we've got to answer the question concerning power. Or in other words, the question is, the commodity, the raw material, is data. Who owns them? That's quite obvious. Who's allowed to use them? That's the next question. And I am really of the opinion that we should stop being so blue-eyed in the field of politics. We in Europe and in Germany have a lot of controversial debates about everything with a lot of emotions involved. But what happened in this regard is that, well, this is our good old Karl Marx behind me, who said that the accumulation of money, power, and, by the way, also innovative strength can be found in the hands of a few only. And what happens? The forces of the market are no longer strong any longer. You know, monopolies have weakened the forces of the market. Of course, it sounds a bit strange as a politician coming from the Social Democratic Party, but I think the forces of the market should be reactivated. The question is, how can these monopolies be limited with their powers? How can their field of influence be restricted? And how can we democratize the forces of the market? We need a process of democratization. We need to scatter these big forces, and we need a new form of policy making vis-à-vis the state policies towards these phenomenon. Therefore, we've got to be awake and be no longer blue-eyed, because these monopolies are not sacrosanct. You can do something against it. When are you going to do that? When are you going to take action? This morning, we remembered Sigmar Gabriel's quote, who said, Germany is going to withstand the internet monopolists. And this is one big discussion going on in the world dealing with the taxation of digital corporates. But the last news that we received in the general public was that the Minister of Finance, Olaf Scholz, in Brussels at the ECOFIN is trying to step on the brake. No, but that's not correct. Thank you for asking me this question in this rather kind fashion, because I would like to be honest and candid. You don't have to believe every nonsense that you read in the internet, you know. I think this is the right audience to put it that way. Let me be honest and blunt. Let me say it in the following fashion. The European Commission submitted a proposal which is not acceptable to an export-oriented nation like Germany at all. And the fact that the German Minister of Finance says that this proposal is unacceptable doesn't mean that no other proposal can be approved of. It's not about the if, but how. You know, the German Commission also said that German car manufacturers should not only pay taxes in Germany, but also abroad. This is off the mark completely as well. I want global corporations to take on their social responsibility, which means that they pay taxes wherever they're based. And this is something that they try to circumvent wherever this is possible, apart from all the problems that exist. Tax evasion is one of the most favored activities of these big players. For that reason, the European Commission initiated a lot of countermeasures. Google had to pay 4.3 billion in total in taxations that it tried to evade, but joint European action really helped us achieve this goal. And that's what we are striving for. We are trying to find a path, and Olaf Schulz is negotiating upon this in order to reach exactly this objective. We wanted to tax digital corporations, not only in Germany, but at least throughout the whole European Union and at best globally. This is our goal, and this is what we're trying to achieve, and we will get there, because anything else would be a crime if we didn't manage to get there. If it doesn't work at the European level, you will take action at the national level? Yes, I do hold the view that, no, let me rephrase it lightly. If you ask me about my preferences, yes, of course, the first preference is at the European level. That was only a theoretical question, just in case. For many years, we've trying to introduce a financial transaction tax because it is not really wise to solve some of the problems at the national level. But also with a view to antitrust legislation, we've got possibilities to take action at the national level. But here too, I'm saying that we need European antitrust legislation. It is not going to solve all our problems, a far cry from it, but this is one of the projects that we are urgently trying to push ahead in Brussels. Let me say honestly and candidly, just because one of the proposals of the European Commission is unacceptable from a German perspective, the Minister of Finance is not going to hit the brakes, but he's trying to find another solution in the German interest. And that's quite legitimate, because not all the French proposals are correct and not all the proposals of the European Commission, because we all pursue a common objective and we are on the right track. And nobody means it more seriously in Europe than Germany and France in order to make headway in this regard. And I think this is an honest and candid statement. And up until December this year, in the next few weeks to come, we'll find a solution. I'm certain of that. Okay. Soon, I would like to take you on board once again. In Europe, this is a very important topic. The funny feeling that they're the big players in the US, which make a lot of money. They're very profitable with the users and the data that they all gather in Europe. But here the users are not really getting that much out of it. What's your take on that? Are you aware of that in the US? And here, of course, the question is, how would a President Trump react to such a move? Trade policies between Europe and the US are not really all in harmony in recent months. Do you think something like this could be conceivable?
No idea what President Trump would do about almost anything. Americans are quite aware that they are being used in some sense by these companies, but it feels free because what they get in exchange is advertising, access to goods, access to your friends. I think, as I tried to say in my talk, we are just at the beginning of the birth of the internet. These are these early companies. They will not shape the future of every online activity we take. And we should not be afraid of developing new things to which people will flock. So my direction is usually encourage innovation, invest in research and development with great universities, and have students develop new things that take advantage of very high capacity networking.
Wir kreisen jetzt eigentlich gestern auch schon.
Now, today and yesterday, we've always circled around the following question. Policymakers want to give shape to the future. We do not want to leave all these questions and decisions up to the corporates. One particular point that we have discussed in the debate yesterday and today is, where are the levers? Where can adjustments be made? Christiane Benner, from your very personal perspective, the plan for the case of emergency, what kind of regulation would you favor? Good evening. I'm delighted to be here. And the discussion deals with a highly complex issue. It's a complicated matter. You have seen the reality in the factories on site. Yes, I'm trying to work my way through the different layers. I think one of the most important points is that the people feel very uncomfortable with these strong powers that these monopolies hold. the Google campus was prevented from being established here in Berlin. That's quite something, because there was a very strong counter movement. People took to the streets and Google withdrew its plan to set up a campus. I'm going to meet them tomorrow. It will be interesting to see what they've got to say, what they really want. I'm not going to organize a counter movement against the campus, but I don't know. But people were very much afraid of gentrification. They thought that the entire district of the town was going to be damaged, and this is why the plan to build this campus in Kreuzberg was withdrawn. So people feel really uncomfortable about these power that these companies held in their hands. But on the other hand, we also know that we can't organize a boycott on the part of the users. You know, you might say, well, I simply refuse to use these tools, but, you know, the social media are extremely fascinating to so many people. And I do hold the view that we need very strict and strong regulations, and part of the profit which is generated and part of the information which is gathered should be socialized. If these companies, let's stick with the big ones in the US, if they would use the money to finance social projects in order to expand the social welfare system, that would be fine, but nothing of that type is happening. There's also a strong polarization in the US-American society that we've observed. And some of the approaches that you have already discussed are saying that from a certain point onwards, from a certain threshold onwards, data should be socialized. That's a very good point, because then other companies can develop their own business models as well. Now, I think these are topics that we should follow suit. But another important point is this. In Germany, I think we also need a stronger cooperation for setting up new alternatives. You know, there are consortia in place consisting of many car manufacturers who are saying, well, we are going to set up a consortium which constitutes an alternative to Google Maps. Why don't we move along the same path and provide incentives? Why don't we get more support in this regard? That is all I wanted to say onto that layer. But what really concerns me as a trade unionist is the following. As a consequence of digitization, a lot of different things are happening at the company level. And Susan made mention of it already. The Uber drivers, 85% of them live or get less than the minimum wage. This is why I do hold the view, and these are also some of the statements that can be found in the white paper. We've got to come up with new considerations of why work in the internet, digital work. Why is this a space where there are no legal regulations in place? This is just like the big Wild West. How can you ensure a minimum of subsistence, first of all? Secondly, the people who have not always worked on a regular basis in our labor markets, but they had to interrupt their working life for a certain period of time. How can we still ensure that they can afford their health insurance and that they are entitled to receive a pension? And how can the companies be condemned to ensuring that they also pay their contributions into the social security systems for the work that they receive from the employees? But this is not happening. This is how we hollow out our social welfare system, and that's a complete and utter disaster. Because, you know, we're talking about people who are not regular employees or who are not in gainful employment. Is that the definition that you would use? Should the definition of employees be amended? Yes. In Germany, we are talking about 5% of the people in gainful employment who have a full-time job or who have a part-time job doing crowdsourcing. And I will talk about our core competences in a minute of how we deal with digitization. But this is a point where policymakers have to come along and tell us we've got a very specific idea of how work can be made socially sustainable. Shoshana Zuboff from the US, an internet scholar, always said, Europe can do better. So there are many from the US who are looking at us very closely, and they're saying, well, you have co-determination in place. There is something like the partnership of the social partners in industry. Try to sort it out, try to get it done. So I think the approaches are there. We still have very good and reliable social security systems, but I'm saying that we are going to make these available for work 4.0. This would constitute a quantum leap forward. if policymakers would support this stance by saying, well, we are closely observing what's happening. We are looking at the way in which people change their positions in gainful employment, and we've got the right answers as well. But this also means that you've got to ask employers to pay. We also have a health insurance for artists. There are a lot of deficits attached to that, but why don't we try to develop new models in order to see to it that people receive all the necessary social benefits they need? Now, one of the policy makers is sitting right beside you. That's the nice thing about the panel, isn't it? I'm not really sure. Not sure about that. How come that people get to feel that they've got the opportunity to shape the future? You know, I'm not one of them who are always saying, well, now things have got to be changed. We've got to do something. But the question is, also a question to the Social Democratic Party, how do you bring the message across? You have to have the right ideas. And I listened very carefully and attentively to what Susan said. And this is something that becomes more and more obvious. We need our own European cloud. A couple of years ago, we haven't had our own surveillance satellite, and then the Europeans joined forces. In the past, we depended on the Russians and the US. We said 1.5 billion, major effort was made. Now the problem was solved. And this is what needs to be done in other areas as well. I can't, of course, do this out of my own strength. The European cloud needs to be done as a joint effort. But at the national level, we can do something in support of the employees by introducing new rules or regulations, one of which is enshrined in the coalition agreement, which is closely associated with it, because we have a lot of independent freelancers in Germany who not really earn enough in order to take care of their old age provisions. They can only, this is going beyond their wildest dreams, but they can't pay contributions into the statutory pension scheme. And this is why this is a matter that is negotiated in our coalition agreement. We said we will introduce a mandatory security obligation for people who are self-employed, and then they will be entitled to pay contributions into the statutory pension scheme. This is a system which will be set up and will be running from next year onward, because precarious jobs, people who are self-employed, you know, in the past, people who were self-employed had a private health insurance. They were always well off, you know, but you won't get any benefits out of that any longer either. But no matter what. Now the situation has changed because many people who are self-employed are in precarious conditions, and therefore we have to open up our social security systems. We offer social benefits to them under different conditions because these people cannot afford to pay the same contributions compared to regular employees. That's the second point. But the third point, and that's even more complicated, is that we've got to ensure that we have the employers who are willing to pay as much into the funds as the employees. You know, 25 years ago, we introduced the health insurance for artists, which is a good idea, which was introduced by the Social Democrats 25 years ago. You know, the employers pay into this fund for artists who are then entitled to receive health insurance benefits. And I think this is a very good idea, a very good model in order to set up a platform for people who are self-employed. It's not all that easy, but it will work. So a lot of things are currently in the pipeline. In other areas, we still have to develop the underlying concepts. But my simple message is, we sometimes make people enthusiastic with very simple things. Uber was banned in Hamburg by Olaf Scholz, for example. And then there was a legal trial, but he won in the second instance. Sometimes you can use simple tools. You can defend yourself if you only wish to do so. Because you might say, well, this is a business model that we don't want here. There are certain things where we simply have to express very clearly what we want and what we don't want. We don't want employers to claim that they are not employers, although they are. You know, in the US, there are also criminal proceedings against Uber, as far as I know, who categorized Uber as an employer, and they have to act accordingly. You know, why does Uber claim that it's simply a platform and that's it? You know, we can take action if we want to. And some other cities follow the example of Hamburg. And it wouldn't be true to say that the business model of Uber has become very well established in Germany, simply because some people took heart and said, no, this is not what we want. From a very personal discussion that I had, I know that the boss of Uber once said in an interview, why should I care about pieces of legislation? And this really annoyed some of the policymakers in Germany so much that he was really subjected to German legislation. You know, and this is where we really have to defend ourselves in Germany. We don't have to follow every single new trend. Now, that is the reply you have to give to your students in the near future, Susan? I guess that's going to be the case. Are you going to refer to the current situation in Europe? But Germany does not provide for this from a cultural angle. Are you not ready for this struggle?
Thank you for the question. What I'm telling my students is that I want all of... sorry. Thank you. What I'm telling my students is that I want them all to serve in government and take a role with these public values and understand what their obligation is. We're also, right now, taking on autonomous vehicles. Many cities in the United States, faced with the cataclysm of Uber, are now drawing back and saying it is our opportunity now to think about our public values in the face of the advent of driverless cars. So that's fascinating, and that's the next generation. So I guess what I'm doing is asking them to look forward, be joyful, serve, and have very clear principles and an understanding of the line between public and private, which right now is quite blurred in the United States.
Von wo aus wir ja auch die Schilderungen kennen.
This is also what we've heard from your descriptions, and this brings me back to the innovations and inventions in the course of digitization and the US companies using wearables. You know, people have to wear a certain outfit at work. Which makes it possible to capture any kind of position, posture, or look of the employees working for the factory. You know, this is a total and utter nightmare to us in Germany. Totally inconceivable, such a scenario. But Christiane Benner, the wearables, what about them? Nothing that I know of in Germany. Well, come on. The data goggles are being used in the factories. People have to put them on at work. And they also wear different bracelets. There are different gloves, different goggles throughout which they receive signals telling them what to do. Or pick by light is another system which is in place where employees are being told which pieces they have to pick. In the BMW plant here or in the engine plant here in Berlin, just a piece of information. So does it work at the workplace? Well, it always depends. Very interesting topic. It always depends. And it differs. And, you know, it depends on how these devices are being used. Let me just give you some positive examples. Some of the employees really appreciate the fact that they have this collaborative way of cooperating with the robots because it releases the workload, ergonomically speaking, if you have to work over your head or if you have to move into the facade in a rather difficult manner in order to assemble certain screws on top of your head, above your head. So to them, it is a physical relief. And, you know, there are other measures with which employees get relieved at the workplace. You know, certain things can be managed and organized based on algorithms. This reduces repetitive work if they get the possibility to get qualified and move into a better position. It always depends on how you shape it, you know.
Recently, I looked at the Diebold Nixdorf company that manufactured these cash dispensers in the ATMs. And the employees can help design a production line. That is, from day one, they were involved in designing Industry 4.0 production lines, and they are extremely satisfied. They said, I have a better workplace now. I can do job rotation. My job has been enriched, and they decided against wearables. I only talk about goggles here. They didn't want these goggles. They had problems with hygiene because they didn't want to share goggles with a colleague. So they simply installed monitors and displays. So their wearable issue was resolved. this is okay because the employees cooperate. They are involved in the redesigning of their workplaces. And because of good works councils, good co-determination, contracts were good and things worked. So I think all this involves massive opportunities if we do it right. But people have to be on board. Nothing becomes good by itself. You have to really get involved. As Susan said, you have to reflect it. You have to consider, what do I want? How do I want to use the possibilities of digitalization? I say technical progress has to lead to human progress. Damn it, in Germany, we're good. We have co-determination. We're innovative. We have good works councils. We have strong trade unions. And I'd like to show you some ideas how we can be in a better position even. But let's do it, and let's shape digitalization with what we can do. And what we discussed in round one is important. That's regulation. And we also have to agree on that. But I see that politicians have to play a responsible role here. But with our social partnership model and the policies we have in Europe, we can do it well. Preserve people's jobs, offer them a good perspective, and that is an alternative to the Anglo-Saxon model of digitalization. Yes, we are still in a good position, but this brings me back to the wearables. So if employees are massively controlled, why don't the trade unions protest against it? And why is it not a problem for you? Well, it depends on data protection. Because, again, data is collected in the process. The question is, how do you use the data? How can you measure people in the strict sense of the word? And then demand that they comply with certain criteria. If you don't have data protection for employees, that is state-of-the-art data protection, and we don't have it in Germany because the Christian Democrats have been rejecting it for many years, then we have to discuss what the trade unions can do. In Germany, they don't have enough power. The works councils need more rights of information and participation. And thirdly, why aren't they all against it? Because there are also advantages. I was at BMW, looked at the production side of 210, only men who lifted engine blocks and worked on them. Then I went to another production line of 213, and there were so many women there. Why? Because the engine blocks were lifted by robots now. And a lot of women all of a sudden had good, well-paid industrial jobs. And before, they only had very poorly paid service jobs. So this is not a disadvantage for society that women can now make good money in production. So that's why I'm saying it's about data protection for employees, co-determination of works council members, and it's about the question how we can manage and see to it that we avoid the individual employee to completely lose his or her rights. So they are only employed according to utilitarian principles, because that is the danger in it. Exploitation is the danger, and we just have to honestly say it. And co-determination works against exploitation. How are the trade unions prepared in case production lines in the future will not look as we wanted, that robots lift the engine blocks and women work on them, but rather robots lift the blocks and robots work on them? Well, I prepared myself well for this discussion. This was the title of the Spiegel magazine of the 17th of April, 1978. And it said, "Progress renders people unemployed, the computer revolution." Now we are in the fourth industrial revolution. It's a different phase. Globalization, information, science, all that has been discussed here. That's a completely different type of industrial revolution, but we can also shape it and design it through qualification, through proper stock taking. The Metal Workers Union is always a little magnanimous in this context, but it's a good thing, Andrea. Believe me. Well, I think you need us, by the way. Anyway, but we now want to draw up a transformation roadmap for each company, and I actually did that in detail, and it's working. In every department, we should see what is changing. Let's go to the automotive factory. Because combustion engines are now being replaced by electrical engines and motors. What is the qualification level we need? What is the technical development? When will the new technology come? We looked at all that and elaborated the qualification models employees have to get. So we really do some very detailed and disciplined stock taking. And then we want to motivate people to get qualified for their new workplace. The same applies to office work. We have a lot of women members in our trade union, and a lot of these office jobs will change through machine learning and artificial intelligence. So how can they become community managers? How can they work with customers? How can they be trained in agile forms of labor? We tackle all that and try to motivate employees to get involved in the digitalized tomorrow. Who tells us that the jobs will get lost? We could shorten working hours if necessary. Why can't we massively reduce working hours for everyone? At the moment, we now have possibilities with the new collective bargaining agreements, with flexible working time models, with the possibility to reduce weekly working hours to 28. It's a question of what you want. It's the will of employees, employers, and trade unions. Well, actually, we look at the overall picture. I started with Keynes, who predicted the 15-hour week for 2030. Now, when we're doing forecasting, we could also quote Mark Twain. I want to come back to Susan with his great saying that forecasts are always difficult, particularly when they refer to the future. So what about the discussion and the projections in the United States from the angle of the US? Will jobs be abandoned? Will jobs be abolished? Will in 10 years people be happy that human beings no longer have to work in these terrible docks? What are the projections?
What the U.S. is focusing on is workforce development, and particularly modeling humans working with robots, being complemented by robots, using them as friends in the work process, and also helping people find new forms of work made possible remotely, things like caring for the elderly, checking in on people, healthcare, that will only be possible with very high capacity networks. Another one of my pet issues here is that there are new jobs coming that direction that ultimately will match the jobs lost. But we are in for a very difficult transitional period, and nobody is kidding about that. There will be lots of people who will have their lives turned upside down by the advent of machine learning and robots and jobs. It is going to happen.
Ich möchte da echt widersprechen.
Well, I really would like to contradict you, because this is man-made. These are profit-driven processes, and you ask us we should reflect and see where we want to go. And if I say we design digital change in a way that people are not getting lost on the way, then we can do it. And if we look at all the studies, and after we've completed our transformation atlas and roadmap, knowing how digitalization affects certain companies. This is better than any McKinsey study because I really know what happens. In Germany, we have the system of dual training. We have a great basis to work from. And people were qualified in recent years, no problem. So there is no crystal ball, and the studies that also contradict each other. I think that's so cool. One says one thing, the other contradicts it. Let's just do it. And what I find shocking is that Bitkom, the Association of IT Companies, they said themselves that 2/3 of their companies don't have a digital strategy. And that is playing with the future of employees. Gambling. So the employers should tell us where they want to go. They also have to do their homework. We have to demand strategies from them. You don't believe it. The world is upside down in some companies, really. But sometimes that's difficult. Now, what is your digital strategy, the digital strategy of the trade unions? Well, we're in the middle of doing it. We already have it. Well, companies can say that too. Well, we already initiated changes in companies. In production lines, we have connected machines, cyber-physical systems, working according to the principles of Industry 4.0. So our workplaces have already changed, and now employees have to be able to analyze data. Their jobs change. They have to be able to understand what predictive maintenance is, for example. So our strategy is that we look at the changes and try to qualify the employees so they can work in these new jobs. We're already doing it, but the impact is different depending on the companies. We can't do everything overnight. But what I'm more concerned about, to just tell you that immediately, and here I have my demands to politicians, what we're concerned about is that the companies, the big ones where we really have a good position, they buy startups or they carry out spin-offs because they want to be independent of rules and regulations, and they want to have people develop apps 24 hours a day. And that happens without collective bargaining agreements and regulated wages. And it would be a good signal if we could say, as soon as a company outsources or establishes a subsidiary, they're still bound by the collective bargaining agreements. That is often the case, that they systematically escape from these collective bargaining agreements and these rules, and that's a scandal. So we have our civil code, section 613A, that they have to follow these rules for 1 more year, but then you're running behind them. And that is really a malicious method. We have 143 working time models for working at Siemens. We established agreements for agile work and mobile work. We're not sitting there doing nothing at the trade unions. Verdi did great things with Deutsche Telekom. So we're really involved and we're getting started, and that employers can simply outsource or spin off so these agreements don't apply, or internationalization is also one of those trends. Politicians could change these laws. Why should employers always prevail? If we want sustainability and a safe social network, then we have to get going and we have to do something. Andrea Nahles wants to take this home as a message. Well, this is a very nice example. You always talk about the politicians, the different parties in Germany, right? And, by the way, bear with me, there are such drastic differences between the political parties regarding this topic compared to others. There's only one party that is willing to pay for improving co-determination. That's the Social Democratic Party. The others don't want to do that. In the Jamaica negotiations. They didn't even negotiate it. I negotiated it, and people did not agree with me. It's not Christmas. If I want 25% of support, I don't get it. With 30%, I might be successful. When you talk about politicians per se in connection with co-determination, that's not correct. For years, I've completely agreed with you. We've been trying to achieve that. It's not the politicians, not Andrea Nahles, not the Social Democrats who don't want to achieve this. But we don't have enough support. That's the problem. And some of the points I wanted to achieve couldn't be achieved because of that. But we were successful, for example, by integrating self-employed people into the statutory social security system. And we also agreed other things. But hey, people, this is always such a big fight. There are some very touchy things, such as part-time work, distribution, co-determination. I have a huge list of things that have to be modernized because we still have a steam engine at a time of fast and high-speed trains. And that is really unacceptable. So for years we wanted to modernize the system, but it's not possible because the social and political support is lacking. I just wanted to say that because saying the politicians, no, it's not the politicians. There is a difference between politicians. Final remark to all of you. I think the strategy we have in common is, because you said, do we have a strategy? Yes, we do. The strategy is qualification, qualification, and qualification. Shorter working hours and regulation. These are the three central elements that can make for strategy in the digital age, because I don't believe in the end of work. I only believe in the end of good work if we continue business as usual. And we have something to lose in Germany. Some people might not think it's important. If I walk around Silicon Valley, nobody's interested in that. I visited Silicon Valley, and I tell you, that is the first issue I focus on. It's not that we no longer have jobs, but the good jobs might get lost. And I completely agree with Christiane. I cannot accept that people say that human beings get lost in the transformation process because they all vote for Trump, and we don't want that here. If people are like chess figures, are uprooted, no longer feel respected, feel like they're losers, that they're left out, you shouldn't be surprised if democracy is abolished. Good jobs means a stable democracy. That's my deep conviction. It's a fundamental issue of our democracy.
Okay, we'll take that down in the minutes. Next time we also have to ask a representative of the CDU come and join us here. Now let us ask the people in the audience to take the floor. Maybe a member of the Conservative Party, Philip. 2 requests for the floor. Markus Heumann, Social Entrepreneurship Network in Germany. These are very important topics that you've discussed, but one point has been completely neglected, which is very important if we want to take the next steps. Who can use a platform? Who owns the platform? In Germany, we are only currently pursuing a policy where we're saying, well, exit on the capital market, or a company which is listed on the stock exchange can afford to run such a platform. It might be good and recommendable, but in the analog world, we have also created platform models where independent cooperatives or associations ran the platforms. We also had a meeting on platform cooperatives in the Social Democratic Party's building. And this is where we discussed exactly those things, which said that either the users benefit, the general public benefits, or else the platform has to serve a particular purpose. Ecosia is a... What is your question exactly? That is exactly what my question boils down to. Why can't we work on the DNA of the companies? Because we've already developed the answers after the Industrial Revolution, but we forgot our own culture And with regards to the future, we simply copy what's happening in other countries. And I think it would be very nice to revitalize our own values, because founders at the current moment in time cannot really carry these old values into the future. Went any long way to Liechtenstein? Schulz, Susan might know him, participated in one of our meetings, and this is what I also integrated into our policy strategy. One of the problems of the cooperatives in this regard is that they don't get as much support in Germany as other regular startups. This is an affair which keeps the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Economics busy due to the event that we just organized, because it doesn't make any sense. You might have very good reasons for that, but I think we really, really need to embark on completely new avenues. And we at the state level also have to open up new alternatives and promote them as much as we can. This is why I do hold the view, and this is one of the main struggles that I fight in the political realm. We need to make possible what is currently not possible in Germany. This is an issue which is really on our plate now, and within the possibilities given to us in the government, we try to intervene. And I hope that tangible results will soon be produced. The gentleman here in the front. I would like to add to that. I'm looking around in the audience, and if you wish, you can give me a show of hands, because otherwise you all raise your hands at the same time. You can also do so in between. Onno Brandt. I wanted to pick up the example of co-determination. The Social Democratic Party does have a problem at the current moment in time, because many people don't know exactly what the SPD stands for any longer. Mr. Fieber-Gümbel, in analyzing the results of the election in Hesse, was completely right with what he said. In the context of co-determination and economic participation leading all the way up to cooperatives, there is a lot of untapped potential for you to position yourself strongly in the limelight of public attention as the Social Democratic Party. I've been a member for 40 years now, but you know, the way in which the party tried to position itself in recent weeks does not let me realize that the topic of co-determination, the Works Constitution Act 4.0, or industrial policy-related issues have not really been put into the limelight of public attention or been put onto the political agenda. It has neither fueled a debate amongst the participants nor in the general public in order to mobilize the people and be able to gain more majorities. You probably guess what I'm going to say next. I wonder whether Andrea Nahles is of the same position. So I have to tell you honestly that I know exactly what the SPD stands for. Yes. It's quite simple. You can read it when you look at what we are doing. I was the Minister for Labor and Social Affairs. I introduced the minimum wage, the age of retirement at 63, the conditions for generally binding collective agreements was improved. We reintroduced the general binding nature of collective agreements once again, which had been damaged before. And by the way, I also introduced a process, Work 4.0, which was a term that did not exist, only industry and the expansion of broadband. This is all we discussed, but nobody spoke about Work 4.0. But the Social Democrat Andrea Nahles came up with a white paper, a green paper on Work 4.0. Once you have been defeated in the elections and you're all disappointed, but you've did everything right and you fought a really hard-fought struggle, and if you are standing up saying that you don't know what the SPD stands for, then that's fine. I do not subscribe to that point of view at all. We have a pension package ensuring long-term pensions. We have one of the biggest care system reforms that we carried out, where we try to see to it that care will not be included into general lump sum payments, but people get remunerated for the care services they provide by the health insurance schemes, which means that more nurses can be hired in the hospitals. If you all look at the things that we are currently working on, And if you just add the soundbite by saying, well, we don't really know what the SPD stands for any longer, then I really have to tell you openly and candidly, some one of you is having a problem. I don't, because I know what we stand for. And, you know, I kind of had enough. I'm fed up. Because you can only encourage me to interrupt the debate, because this is not an SPD debate, but this is a debate for something that we are struggling for, by the way. Digital capitalism. That is an issue that I've been dealing with for months now. As one of the previous speakers already indicated, we've had several different meetings in the SPD headquarters on the issue of digital capitalism. What does it mean? I suggested a date for a law to be introduced because we all have to be prepared for this new scenario, and it must be possible. If you take a close look at the party, we'll realize rather quickly what the SPD stands for. To be honest, I have to admit that when preparing myself for the discussion yesterday, I started off with exactly this very topic because many people do not know any longer what the SPD stands for. I think it's what we've learned after the elections in Hesse. I have to defend Mr. Wann's position, and he's not the one who should be blamed. But I'm fully on your page. We shouldn't go more into detail in the course of the discussion. But one more point would be added. We're talking about fundamental and existential questions concerning justice, and that is why the SPD also has to be able to give us an answer. Yes, come on. Excuse me, statements which are being made of mic cannot be translated. Yes, I agree. Now, there's one more request for the floor in the back of the room. I've been a member of the SPD for several years, and I'm in a similar situation. I do have the same problem. The gentleman over there. People talk a lot about giving shape to the future. We want to give shape to digital transformation. We always want to shape. In order to be able to give shape to things, you need power. Who has got the power? The king. Who's the king? The customer. The customer is also the ones casting a vote. Now we're in a dilemma because the problem is the king is fixated by the corporations, dependent upon them. He's a consumer. And now we're really in a dilemma because the customer is king with a view to the corporations and all the different products that Google and others have to offer, but that also depend on them, they hinge on them. And at the same time, they're the voters, and this brings policymakers into a dilemma. How can this dilemma be overcome? How can we get out of this situation, which is a catch-22? Should we leave the question as it is? I still need some time to think about it. Susan, would you like to come in on that?
It is a little difficult for me to understand because the voice is soft from the interpreter. I got that the question was about how do you remove the politician from the influence of the corporation so that the customer really is king. And I think this very, very basic point about conflicts of interest and funding is so fundamental, and it is not one we have dealt with well in the United States. And it is always so unclear who is really pulling the strings, and whatever could be done to clarify that and to make people feel agency, autonomy, effectiveness as voters under leaders that understood them is the way forward. And I think your leader is trying to say that she is that way forward. So I'm satisfied.
Okay, jetzt warten Sie mal, mir ist vorhin gesagt worden, dass in der Ecke immer viele Wortmeldungen von.
Well, I always get the questions from the same corner of the room now. Let me look over to the other side of the room. Over there. Over here? Okay. You know, I really didn't see you. Sorry about that. No problems. My name is Carla Jungkönig. I come from Heidelberg. And the point that they raised, which was unfortunately not answered, is one that I would be particularly interested in. A person who is a consumer and a voter at the same time. How can such a person contribute to the fact that policymakers regulate and control corporations? You know, if the policymakers said that Facebook is no longer allowed to use the data of the voters, then the voters might say, well, this is a daft idea because I like using and I enjoy using Facebook. Now, how can this problem be overcome? Because this is what I have, a problem that I have in the feeling of urban development. If I want to organize mobility in a new way, how can that be done? Maybe with the help of Uber, but I don't want to cooperate with Uber. So what else can I do? I want to collect the data of the participants, but I don't want to pass them on to others, to third parties. But basically, the principle is not bad. Okay, would you like to try to answer that, Andrea Nahles? Because I might add to that question in order to make it a bit more pointed and provocative. This is not the only dilemma that policymakers are facing. Or, I mean, this is part of your daily routine. This is business as usual. You are in a situation of dire stress day by day. That's right. People want good wages. They want to have decent working hours. At the same time, like crazy, they order products and services without being aware of what this Hermes delivery service or other transportation services have to accept concerning working hours and wages, you know, and if the dispatch companies are saying, well, today you don't have to pay for the deliveries to be shipped back home, they reduce the wages of the people working for that company once again, although the clients are happy with that. You know, you have to find the right strategies in order to be profitable in the end, in the interest of all. You know, if you're a policymaker and if you discuss it and if you come up with a decision, and I've really made very good experience with people saying, okay, I'm fair enough. That's something that I'm willing to pay for. If I get extra service, I'm willing to pay more for care services. There was no upheaval when this happened. We increased the rates that have to be paid for healthcare. And if people are willing to pay for that, people are willing to accept it because this is a socially acceptable solution. And this is how it also could be done in this regard. You know, it sounds a bit absurd at first glance, but I think only if we enter into a dialogue can we find the right feasible political solution. That's my opinion. Thank you very much. If you wanted to give Andrea a little big hand, please feel free. I didn't want to interrupt you. But I think this is a very important point. Communication is of the essence. The problem is that there are very problematic circles. If you reduce taxes at the local level, your tax revenues decline, then you've got to reduce remuneration elsewhere. So this is a systemic problem. Talking about this within the municipalities and explaining why a certain decision was taken against a certain model, then you can take the people on board, then you can convince them. But we don't have to have a discussion amongst the elite behind closed doors of those who can afford everything. But if wages and salaries go down, buying things rapidly and quickly, and the promise of being able to do so is rather tempting. But then also the people who earn a lot of money want to make a good bargain. So you really have to have the right discussion about what you're willing to pay for and what you want to be able to afford. That is a discussion that we need to wait because we want to have decent jobs in lots of different sectors. We are talking about the digital economy, but in Germany we have really serious problems because there are many people who live below the poverty line. And they don't earn enough money, first of all, and they've got to find a new job, which is moonlighting, but because there are too few people working in customs. So there's also a necessity to open up the field in a way. And this is very important because this is not only a task for the policymakers or politicians, but we need to restore confidence and trust and come up with a clearly defined objective of what kind of society we are striving for and what kind of work we want to have in the labor market. So we also have to do our job in the trade unions. I do not only try to delegate responsibility to you, we try to do everything in our power, but we reach our limits when companies act in a certain way. But this is my plea to you. I think we should become fully aware of the whole plethora of different topics in Germany and why we tilt to the right in the political arena and why nobody becomes aware of the social policy progress that has been achieved. And I think we in the trade unions also have to leave no stone unturned in order to see to it that we will take care that additional told workers will be promoted. And we in the trade unions had to open up ourselves as well. We want to increase the conditions for such a new scenario. It would be wrong to say in the metal or electronics industry everything is wonderful and rosy. Doesn't help us get anywhere, because wages and salaries are under tremendous pressure. This is why we jointly have to define our targets and take people in precarious jobs along by telling them, we won't leave you in the lurch. We are going to take you along as well. If we can't implement the minimum wage, okay, let us try as policymakers and as trade unionists in general terms, in the realm of politics, let's make sure that we don't leave you in the lurch. We are going to take you on board, because otherwise we will not be able to develop an appropriate concept to counter the people in the right-wing realm. And I'm really afraid that they will gain more power. And we've got to hollow their arguments out. Otherwise, we won't be able to achieve any progress. We have to take precise action, because otherwise we will run into serious problems in the field of politics. Well, let's take a look at Barcelona, because we listened to the keynote of Francesca Bira during the previous session. The gentleman from the Senate administration. My name is Mr. Kohlmann, Senate administration in Berlin. Mrs. Nahles, I wanted to ask you once again, why don't you find the right partners in the alliance for your common cause in Germany, not only here, but also elsewhere? Only 15% of the Germans believe in what you say. There are many potential alliance partners. One of them is sitting right beside you. It's kind of strange if you're saying that you invented Work 4.0. The trade unions, we at the federal state level, are working on it. But you are standing up here saying that this was your invention. You know, I've heard the same again and again from my home city. Olaf Scholz, he said, well, me. I abolished Uber and I got the support from the courts. Why don't you try to find the right political and social allies? Why do you ignore, in the context of co-determination, the party of the left? Since it has been in existence in the national parliament, it is exactly asking for the same things. And you know, all the questions that we've discussed in the course of this debate, why don't you try to find the right allies? Why did you form a coalition with the wrong partner? I'm wondering.
Auch das ist eine Frage.
Well, that is also a question. Well, that people cannot answer here or do not want to answer. We don't have the right majorities at the moment. I frankly wondered many times why people always ask us this question. The question whether we were able to form a government with the left party that you mentioned that you obviously like, which is completely okay. That question has to be answered by the left party because they don't answer it. There are some people in the left party who wanted to enter into a coalition with us. I'm open. I've been open for that since 2009. Others absolutely refuse to work with us. So you have to clarify it among yourselves, because I'm not the person who is against a red-green coalition per se. In 2009, Sigmar Gabriel and I took over responsibility and tried to remedy mistakes our predecessors made because they didn't discuss with the left party, and we started talking to them. The Federal Party Convention of the Social Democratic Party explicitly agreed that we can have discussions with you. So I repeat, I'm open for discussions, but please clarify among yourselves whether you want to be part of government, because you have to find common aspects and common goals in the foreign policy questions, in the social and co-determination policies. We probably agree rather quickly, but there are other policies where we cannot possibly reach an agreement. So we have to work on that. And again, let me repeat, I'm willing to enter into dialogue and to start talking about common goals at any time. Of course, we need another power option. We need the possibility to get out of this strange grand coalition and find other social majorities. I'm explicitly in favor of that. I don't know whether you looked at your watches. I'm shocked because our time's up. Thank you to our three panelists. Thank you to the audience for that stamina that deeply impresses me, because you've been sitting here from 9 o'clock this morning until now. Thank you very much for that. And some final remarks will be made by Andrea Wille and Christoph Fink, the organizers of this conference. Good evening, everybody. We just wanted to briefly say thank you to the many participants who came today and yesterday. We were more than 1,000 participants. We had more than 60 speakers, and I'd like to thank you for your lively discussions, for the debates, for the content, for the input. Thank you for everything. But I would also like to thank the panelists, Andrea Nahles, Christiane Benner, Susan Crawford. Thank you very, very much. And of course, I'd also like to thank our chairs. It was difficult to chair all these meetings, and thank you very much for that. We'd also like to thank our cooperation partners, the DGB, particularly Kai Lindemann and Thomas Fischer, the Heinz Böckler Foundation with Isa Röpf and Christine Schildmann, who's now working for the Willy Brandt House. Then the Letters for German International Policy, the Institute for the Future of Work, Mareike Winkel and Philipp Stab, and the SPW, Ole Beermann, Kai Burmeister and Stefan Stachel, and Arno Brandt. Without you, this event wouldn't have been possible. We hope we will have another conference like that next year, and we hope that our media partner, Le Monde Diplomatique and Tagesspiegel, will also support us again. Thank you very much. The Friedrich-Ebert Foundation also contributed to this event, and we should particularly like to thank Irene Nickel, Nora Naye, Lisa Marie Schmidt, Silma Assmann, and Jana Weber, but also the colleagues from our management, the technicians, and the catering people. And finally, we'd like to thank the head of our department, Dr. André Gerber. Without him, this conference wouldn't have been possible, because he also supported us while we were preparing this conference. I think after these intensive discussions for 1.5 years, we deserve a break. And by the way, the interpreters also deserve a break, and we'd like to thank them very much. It's been a pleasure for us too. And I would like to invite you, on behalf of all the institutions organizing this conference, to participate in our reception that will be right next door in the exhibition. Thank you very much.